to order. October 16th, 2017. Meeting of the Arlington Redevelopment Board, recorded by ACMi. Get right into business this evening. First up is proposed changes or workshopping potential changes to the environmental design review application and process. So Jenny, if you want to lead us through that, facilitate,
Sure.
please.
Yes. So I put on the agenda about 45 minutes of time for this because one, I figured it's really very much a starting conversation. We all know we're in the midst of a recodification process. We're not proposing any policy or other zoning bylaw amendments at this time, but since it is one of the stated goals of the ARB, and also since we were coming off of a couple of recent EDR special permits, and we wanted to kind of debrief that a little bit and also give some feedback, I put the item on the agenda so that we could start the discussion, with the framework being that we would maybe talk about like sort of the strengths and weaknesses of the process. I was going to really give it sort of higher level, not edit by edit each section. I don't think that that's necessarily, that this is the appropriate time to do that. But more the broader how we're using it, how good it's working, and then the things that we would like to change. I think I noted in my email to you leading into the meeting tonight that RKG Associates had provided, as part of the zoning assessment and then the prior zoning audit, pretty detailed amendments that we could make to EDR, and then also asked some questions earlier this year about do we really want it to be site plan review and not a special permitting process. So we have been left with a number of questions that we could answer at some point. And for those of you who also see the memo, you can, which is also in this packet, you might have had an opportunity to look at those things and want to reflect on that. So that's in the, it says RKG on it. And it just goes through section by section of the zoning bylaw and talks about things that we might want to amend. But for this particular article or item on the agenda, I gave you two things. One is the special regulations, which is section 11 of the environmental design review guidelines, which is in the zoning bylaw. And then the second thing is I gave you an application, just a blank EDR special permit application. I thought that that's what we could really use for this discussion item, not thinking that that would be the best place to really start. So, does everybody have that material? Mm-hmm. It's pretty much, this is what people receive when they come to our office. Of course, they usually sit down with us. We talk through an application with them. Depends on where they're at within their application. And then, of course, we reference the zoning bylaw, which goes into greater detail on all of the required criteria and standards in 1106. Does anybody have any questions about this particular discussion item before I kind of kick off? I thought I might write things down and kind of scribe a little bit while we're talking to make it easier and to get circulation flowing. Any questions?
In 3.4, which is used to be 1106.
In the second reading draft, 1106 is now 3.4. So in case you wanted to look at what's the proposed new draft of the zoning bylaw.
I always have to remind myself that you trigger the special permit. The special permit has certain items which are listed here, and then it also triggers an EIR. EDR, Environmental Design Review.
Yep.
So the special permit initial ones, which have to do with use and appropriateness of the project, and then separately you have environmental design review. And how do you characterize those? One has to do with why it's a special permit, and the other one is the the environmental design review. I'm trying to find it right now, I can't find it. Oh, here it is. It's decision criteria.
Right.
Things like the request is use is essential and desirable to the public convenience or welfare.
Mhm.
So you have all that basic, big picture stuff.
Mhm.
That's not on this that they have to read that themselves in the,
They would know before they even file that,
Right.
that that's what's triggering them having to use the paperwork and the forms. Usually they come to the Planning and Community Development Office and talk with us. We might encourage them to use a different process. It might not be an EDR anyway. It might be, they might need
always
to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals.
think
for
to
example.
myself how the environmental design review overlaps with those. Why? What's the difference?
You mean the difference between,
Decision criteria, A, B, C.
mhm,
I mean, we when we review a special permit, we think about its intended use, its appropriateness of its use,
yeah,
desirable to public convenience and welfare, as well as traffic. And then you get into the actual EDR stuff, and that's a little more specific, but not exactly touching on use. It touches on how the building fits in. Or the,
mhm.
so I always try to figure out why those aren't in the EDR.
Are not in the
Yeah.
EDR?
They're special. They're
Mhm.
separate decision criteria.
Right, well, those are separate decision criteria that are also broader than the EDR process, so
Right.
they would be applicable to other special permit granting authorities, like the Zoning Board of Appeals.
I see. So those are overall
So, and that's
special
what
permit. Okay.
I think the intro is talking about which granting authority they're talking about.
So when you're doing an application, and we always do this, we always list them, and then we go, these are the criteria, and then we have EDR after that.
That's
when
starting
you-
on page,
Right, I see that on this page.
On
But when
3.5.
when you do your report, you
Mhm.
always list both, so we
Yes.
can talk about both.
that's right,
Okay, I'm just saying, I always,
yeah. They
try to
basically,
remember that
they
the-
basically go together.
yeah. But they're kept separate because,
I don't know the history of why they are
Okay, I'm just-
specifically separate in the zoning bylaw, but the environmental design review process is essentially this board's ability to grant special permits. And the criteria that has been established over, additional criteria in addition to other special permit criteria that exists in the town. And that exists only for a limited area of the town, because if you look at where EDR applies, it's only like Mass Ave, main corridors and there's other more limited criteria of where you apply it, so
no, those are
it's,
for the special permit.
um,
See, that's the difference. EDR is the detail. Once you've decided on its appropriateness of its use and all that special permit stuff, then you go into EDR, which is more specific.
right, exactly, that's what I mean. That the EDR is more narrow
Yeah,
to
right.
and these specific standards and criteria are more narrow to these areas of town
Right.
specifically.
I'll let you
Do you,
stop
do,
on
are you,
that one.
but
It
are
always
you
confused
making,
me.
do you have a suggestion about how
No.
it could be different?
I always trip on that though,
Okay,
because it's EDR, but before EDR, there's special permit, which has to do with the overall appropriateness of the project. Like, do we need another bank
Right.
on Mass Ave in this 1 mile stretch where we already have 10 banks?
mhm,
It's not an EDR issue. It's a
just a-
special permit.
mhm.
Anyway, whatever. They're both reviewed. And I always have to remember that
Which,
they're part of the same process, but they're very different.
mhm.
So anyway, when you do your review, you have to do both of them.
So
Yes.
is,
It's confusing to me
I'm
sometimes.
gonna-
well, now
Right.
I'm confused. Is the question whether you can basically grant the special permit
Without the EDR?
without the EDR?
No, it says in here.
No.
It tells you can't.
The EDR is how the ARB will review a special permit and choose whether to grant it. Those are the criteria that this board is required to
So-
use. The ZBA has a different set of rules and regulations. I don't know exactly.
Well, except they also start with the same criteria.
The use, yeah.
They start with the same criteria.
The
but
decision
they don't consider
criteria.
the same. They won't go to 3.4 like we will.
anyway, it's always something I have to keep
Well, and
reminding me.
that's partially why this topic actually came up back in January, actually, at the all board meeting. We had a conversation about, do we want it to be EDR? Do we want it to be site plan review? Do we want to really kind of revamp the entire process entirely? And we've kind of left it there, but there are things that need to still be clarified, and I think you raise an important distinction, clarification that's still perhaps needed.
I think the one thing that you can focus it on is the first criteria, decision criteria, includes use, but EDR does not. It's how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important that I think that the ARB talk about the appropriateness. Is it essential and desirable to the public convenience? Is the use desirable? So I'm just saying that's always thrown me off, because people say, oh, we gotta do an environmental design review, but really it's also including those key considerations in the front.
What are you reading from where you have those key considerations?
So go to page,
He's in the second reading.
It's 3.3.
draft, by the way, and not in the existing zoning bylaw.
3.3, okay.
of the big book. It's the new rewritten part of the special permit process.
Just regular 3 point.
3.3,
Okay,
then 3.333, 3.3.3. It's a decision requirement.
It's
right.
the preamble. to the
Once you
preamble.
have the decision requirement, then you
Mhm.
work your way over to
Right.
3.4, which is in environmental design review. The purpose of section provides for initial detail of certain uses and structure. It's a detailed review,
Mhm.
but it's just, because when we do these things, we always just lump them together. We start off with the use, appropriateness of the use and all the big picture, and then we move right into EDR, but we refer to it loosely as EDR,
Yes,
but technically it's not. It always kind of like,
Got it.
got me.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll work it out.
Well, it's something that we can also clarify later on is through this process. Maybe we need to update the language to make it clear that those are all factors that are considered.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
It sort of follows up on this a little bit. The order in which an applicant gets approval for special permit, let's say, do they come up to the ARB first and get approval from us, then they go to DEP, they go to COMSCOM, or is all that stuff, you go to them first, get their approval, and then come to us saying, we have approval from Department of Transportation, Conservation Group, and they concur, they feel like they fall within their bylines, and then it comes to us to say, okay, with that, all those considerations in board, in our considerations, then it's approved. Which order is it going right now? Because I've sort of seen it both ways.
Yeah. It's a question. Which way does it go?
Yes, that's my question.
I think context is everything, and sometimes there's one particular order that makes sense for a project, and sometimes there's another order. Sometimes things are happening simultaneously. That's more often the way that I've seen things happen here in Arlington, where, you know, they're hitting multiple, they being a developer or proponent, they're hitting multiple boards at the same time in tandem, because time's everything. And so often we'll put in our reviews that something is contingent upon another board's review or other standards that need to be in effect, et cetera. There is not actually a particular tree, like a decision tree that we have. That's actually part 2 of zoning recodification, where we'll deal with administrative procedures. And it
Okay.
is definitely something that needs some,
Because I wouldn't mind
Work.
talking about that, because in other places that I've done, there's definitely a pecking order
yeah,
in which you have to seek your approvals.
right,
And yes, we're not trying to slow them down, but
right,
it's all the city agencies are all be done simultaneously.
yeah.
But it doesn't come to the board until all those have been approved of.
And so back at the all-board meeting, we talked about having the Planning and Community Development Office basically serving as a hub for any new permits that are coming in, and then helping to create a timeline, create a process
Okay.
depending upon the project. Right now, it doesn't work that way.
Okay,
But
and it won't be
is-
addressed in this one here, it'll be the
It'll
second.
be like the part 2 after we're done with recodification,
Okay.
then we'll work on administrative rules and procedures.
Okay, fair enough, I'll just table that for now then.
I think it's good.
As far as administrative rules and procedures,
Yeah.
how far can we go with drafting those and putting them into putting them into use without having to go in front of town meeting?
I think most of it has to be, we still have to remove it from the zoning bylaw before we can work on it.
Okay.
So that's why you don't see a lot of the administrative procedures in the second reading draft, is
Mhm.
because that's something we would like to be able to work on separately.
Okay.
But would still have to bring before town meeting to remove them from the existing zoning bylaw first.
Okay.
And then, yes, we would technically be able to still work on them and
Mhm.
update them, maybe annually, maybe greater spans of time. So do you have a question, Jim?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on Andrew's question, because I hadn't actually focused on those sections, at least in the second reading draft. And I think what I find sort of interesting, and I think I might share your concern, is that the environmental design review section says, a special permit shall be acted on by the ARB in accordance with the environmental design review standards, and it doesn't reference the other standards above. So I think there's, in the second draft here, there's a real internal contradiction between this section that doesn't reference the earlier section. And probably we should clean that up and say, you know, anything that goes to the ARB, we make a decision based upon the criteria listed in 3.3 plus the environmental design review criteria. Because it doesn't say that now.
I know,
Right.
that's what was, yeah.
Yeah.
You wanna send along, we can capture that or put that as an amendment, because we would need to send any more. If you have any other sort of suggestions like that, I guess I'd wanna get them, like the specific edit to the language.
Yeah, I'll try to do that, but I think it's simply amending 3.4.2
Okay.
in the second reading draft to indicate that the decision's made not only on 3.4, but also on the criteria listed in, where is it?
3.3.3.
3.3.3, thank you. It seems to not allow us to do that in the second reading draft.
Yeah. It's kind of automatic, but it should be referenced.
It should be spelled out.
be
It needs to
out,
be
yeah.
spelled out because.
I understand I totally
Yep.
understand your point, but if,
Well, because it is spelled
Looks like
out and
you're
it's
editing.
spelled out.
The wrong
Are you
way.
editing?
I'm
The
just
wrong
making
way,
a note.
yeah, exactly,
because
the
I'm
wrong
like
way.
not hand
Right.
editing.
I'm kind of taking Jean's everybody's comments and then my own questions.
And if you want to hand me like the edited version, I can make
you,
the
thank you.
updates into
That-
the
that-
document.
that's
and
You may
what
give
just
it
try to
to
watch
RDC.
the bastard.
Yeah, it took me a while to get there.
And,
I could just watch it on TV, you're right. So do you want to have just sort of taking a step back for a moment and not how this process fits within other processes? We've all had an experience working with the applicants, trying to apply the criteria, making decisions. Could we maybe just bring the conversation to what's working about the process right now, what works, and then talk about what we think we would like to change.
Before we get into that, is the language in the 3 point?
Too much.
Sorry. I just want to set parameters for the discussion. So that we're not asking to change things that we can't change because they're prescribed by statute and
Right.
then incorporated to the bylaw.
Yeah, we won't.
So is 3.3 and the rules and guidelines therein taken straight from 40A?
I'd have to read it more. 3.3. Oh yeah.
This entire section, 3.3 regarding special permits, is everything in there straight out of state law,
The decision criteria.
the decision criteria, so we could,
Some of it is,
Okay.
not, you can see where there's things that relate just to Arlington,
And
because
obviously
they'll
we can
reference
go-
town or
we
municipal.
can, well, yeah, but I meant as far as
But yes.
requirements and adding things. We can add things, obviously, but we can't take
Yeah,
things
that's
away.
out of section 9,
Okay.
right,
Section
EDR
nine, or is it
is,
section 11?
I mean, 40A, section 9,
Oh,
sorry.
yeah.
See, I have a little side question. So if you look at 3.4, environmental
There's too many
design.
sections.
If you look at 3.4, environmental design review,
Oh.
3.4.1, purposes, first paragraph, the environmental, last sentence of the first paragraph, the environmental design review process is intended to promote the purposes in section 1 of this bylaw.
So if you go back to section
Yeah,
one,
the purpose, that long
purpose and introduction.
statement.
Yeah. I'm going to section 1,
Yeah.
purpose and authority,
that,
general welfare of the town,
Yeah.
okay.
Actually, it'll be.
But that's where I would have
it'll be
expected
its-
it.
It'll be the original one. This is what is proposed, but we're actually going to revert it
Oh,
back
good,
to
good, I didn't know
the
that.
old original
Okay.
purpose.
which is lifted straight out of 2A of chapter 808 of the
Right.
Acts of 1975.
With some amendments.
Oh, with the one you mentioned, the state
Sorry.
law. See,
Yes,
Yeah, all of that.
so, yeah, so you're giving a special permit, and you better follow those criteria, but you're also exercising an environmental design review as well.
Right.
That's what's going on.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot of criteria.
and then you go back to
Basically.
section one, and section one is pretty, it's,
Just the
again, it comes
boilerplate
straight,
language.
it's boilerplate language, it comes straight out of the statute from 40 years ago.
Yeah.
As far as what cities and towns should be advancing as their goals, and it's,
It's like a zoning roll call.
And
Yeah.
that's where you get those 3.3.3s, those are from that.
that's where,
We will do these things.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
part of where 3.3.
Right, which are really good overall goals for a special permit.
Right,
In fact, they overlap the EDR goals in
Mhm.
some ways,
You mean
including
the
traffic.
purpose statement? Back in the purpose statement?
Yeah, the design criteria.
so I think what I would like
See
to
what I'm
do.
saying?
Yes.
I
Actually,
think,
David, do you
sorry,
want?
go ahead.
Because David and Jean, yeah.
Well, I actually, I only bring this up because we were already talking about the definitional problem that Jean raised. But thinking about just putting this on the table because it's part of that, in 3.4.3E, where it says, we shall not deny a special permit under this section 3.4 unless it finds that the proposed use does not comply with the EDR standards listed below, et cetera, et cetera. But then it lists a bunch of uses that don't entirely track those criteria in 3.3.3. So that seems inconsistent to me, and perhaps we should, rather than listing these out here, should just reference 3.3.3. Because it basically says...
Boy, that's right, you could put it in
Yeah.
there. That's right, because you're saying unless it does not comply with EDR review standards,
And
right.
the criteria in 3.3.3,
Yeah,
rather
it's-
than these loosely defined
But it
use
really is,
descriptions
it's really,
here.
it's a 1-2 punch, and they're not
Yeah.
So,
coordinated, that's the
that's sounding like, that's sounding like a longer term thing, that we would make an
Yeah.
amendment like that, not as part of recodification.
Yeah, well, I'm only bringing it up because now
Just
it's
reading it. in
now
some ways.
it's an inconsistency.
Somehow, I think Andrew, your statement that this is a state law that's been brought in, and then there's a thing we use which is called EDR to define that. It's really what
To define, yeah, so
refine.
special permit loosely is state law that's been adopted, and we go through, and that's how we award things. EDR is what the town has actually adopted to go through and determine whether all those special permit requirements are met.
But they don't include use, and
But they
that's
don't
the
include
thing.
use.
That's the one that always, because it's got so much bite to it, and it's so much about our mission
Mhm.
as taking care of these vital parts of the town, Mass Ave, et cetera, et cetera. We're brought in here in order to exercise judgment for the town's mission, to make those areas of special importance, make them appropriate to the town, the use is correct. In other words, back in the 70s, it was all gas stations and it was all like chop shop, whatever it was. And the town was saying, hey, we gotta think about these areas because it's really not helping the environment we live in. So the use and appropriateness of the project, which is listed in 3.3.3, is key to the thing.
But that's also.
So you
in
can't
your-
say that if you just did an EDR, you wouldn't capture that.
You would still capture that, I think, in an EDR.
No,
but-
but look at EDR regulations.
Yeah, but the way we capture it is actually when we talk about whether or not it actually fits on the site and meets the zoning.
That's different. I
But-
can say that a building doesn't fit quite right on the site is one thing, or it's a little too high for the neighbors. But if I go back to 3.3.3, those are big overarching. Is this use appropriate?
Right.
Is this fit with our town?
I
Look
guess
at
I'm
that.
saying in practice, we do this, but
It's
we
in the
don't-
application materials.
It's in the application materials, exactly. It's not in the bylaw, the way that we're talking about it. That's one of those things,
And
yes.
so we do currently do it with both the EDR criteria and the 3.3.3 criteria.
Yeah, we do, yeah.
In practice.
Yes, we do.
And what Gene raised is a cross-reference issue, to make sure that the bylaw actually says
Yeah.
that's what we do.
Right, right.
And what I'm raising is basically the same, well, it's related to the cross-reference issue, which is 3.4.3E, talks about uses which to some extent track the 3.3.3 criteria, but are not the same.
Right, right.
And so, in the interest of consistency with 3.3.3 and what's already in the application packet, can't we just change that? That seems more like an
It
administrative
seems like an administrative
change
change.
that
Which
we could
would
do
be
as
a-
part of this
David, which
recodification.
would be an administrative change?
Just instead of
zoning bylaw.
listing out these use categories that don't quite
That's right,
track
they're all in
3.3.3, just reference 3.3.3 in there.
Yeah, one is special permit criteria and one is EDR.
I think we
It's-
could-
I think, I don't know, I didn't check if this is the same E, or if it's been rewritten since, in this draft or not.
There's very modest amendments.
But this
to
is, I
whole
think, a
section.
really confusing E, but I think it might be the same, because I think I read it,
The E,
when I
that's
first
the
came on the board.
3.4.3
I don't think it's there.
and
on the
I think,
schedule.
I
I
haven't
can't find it on
looked,
this
but
thing.
It's gonna be
but
on
I always
You're
thought it was
right,
really
because this
so
is the old section.
confusing.
It's
Oh.
here.
Because
Special
Yeah.
design
We
criteria,
have
that's
to, we have to
3.3.3
find, we're
plus
not
it.
gonna
So
say
it
yes.
does list it.
We have to
I can't
find,
really keep track of
That's why
everything.
we're able to hit it.
All right, go ahead.
so, as I read E, if we wanna say, no, you can't have a special permit, we have to both find that, it doesn't comply with the environmental design review standards, but that's not enough, it has to be to such a degree that it will result in a substantial adverse impact upon the character of the neighborhood and upon traffic, utilities, and public or private investments. It's almost impossible for us, I think, to say no under E, because it would have to fit into so many of the no boxes. Maybe that's the intention, but I think it's really, really, really broad. And, somebody cannot do a whole bunch of the environmental design review standards, but it might not have a substantial adverse impact on the character of the neighborhood and upon traffic, utilities, public-private investments, et cetera, et cetera. So, example is one of the criteria is putting utilities underground, but that probably wouldn't, if they just say, I refuse, I'm not sure that that gives us the ability to say you can't have your permit. I just think it doesn't really connect well to what we're supposed to be reviewing and what our authority is to say we didn't meet the requirements.
It's feeling very policy-y at this point. I'm trying to just start this conversation just for us to kind of get into the mindset of what's working with the process and what's really not working with the
Can I ask,
process.
I hate to like not let you get there, but I have another question.
Well, I'm only concerned about our time.
My
so
other
that's
question
all.
is, is why is none of Summer Street listed when it lists the streets? You know, we have Mass Ave and Pleasant.
Mhm.
Because a lot of Summer Street feels the same, you know, especially the more commercial parts of Summer Street. I'm just wondering why it's not listed.
You mean
within
in
it.
our,
Where
is
it
captured?
says,
When you go to A,
Right, when you go to-
3.4.2A.
when you go to, yes.
The areas that are special
Three
permit.
point four point two A. I know we get a lot of Summer Street things because of some of the other letters, but I'm just wondering why in A, at least part of Summer Street was never put in there.
I wondered that too, actually.
Yep. It was a historical
I don't
development.
know why specifically.
Maybe
I mean,
we
you
should
could
save
argue
that
other
for-
streets could be
It
on
was
there as
the
well.
it was
Maybe
the-
for potential.
Has it become more commercial?
Yes, I think
So
it
it's
was,
probably
it was-
appropriate to add that
to
in.
add.
Asked to think about adding that in
Yeah.
when we,
it's
not
what-
in the recodification, but
Right.
in the next
Right.
it's what,
phase.
it's-
Well, I think part of what we're talking about now is the next phase and not
Yeah.
just the recodification.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
we're.
the selectmen determined in the approval of this A, which areas we should be most careful with, and that's why the ARB exists, because of that.
Mhm.
So it's appropriate to to reanalyze that and say, has the town changed enough?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah, initially I thought it was to follow all the business districts, but obviously there are business districts that are on other streets that are not listed,
And there are
Mhm.
non-business districts. in
and there are
some
non-business
cases.
districts.
Right,
Yeah.
it's,
It doesn't follow that at all. I don't know the logic behind it. But I have the history somewhere, so.
All right, Jenny, go.
No, you guys go.
You haven't put any,
What's that?
you haven't put any mark, you have to put some.
What do you
Oh, you
like
did.
about the process? It's a very open-ended question for a reason. I mean,
Well, I
how
thought
about
they
what
were.
do you not like about the
I
process?
thought you were gonna talk about having the process at all, because
I-
I thought that there was in the master plan a discussion of changing the special permit process significantly. I remember hearing about that, maybe I'm wrong.
To what?
Get rid of it.
But to then have what in its place?
I don't know, I just remember that there was a discussion about, do we need such a thorough special permit process, or can it be trimmed down, or I didn't,
I think it's
Mhm.
I think the comment there is just, I know what you mean now. Not necessarily eliminating EDR special permit, but that there are so many, we then have so much special permitting for everything, that everything requires a special permit, as opposed to why wouldn't more things be allowed by right? If it's the kind of thing that we're looking for, why wouldn't it be allowed by right? I think that's more what the master plan was talking about, but not necessarily to eliminate in full EDR special permit process, but what triggers the need for special permits in different districts. That's
Well,
my
that's kind of what
understanding.
Jean is talking about, saying, well, maybe that needs to be analyzed. What, right now, is clearly spelled out in A plus square footage and
no,
size.
A, B, C, D.
Yeah,
E,
all
Yeah.
of that,
Mhm.
yeah. Where does it
Yeah,
apply?
ABC,
Where is it
yeah.
applicable?
If that's on the table, then that should
But-
become,
You know, what, to try to start the conversation about Jenny's question, what I found interesting in my few months here is that I think the two projects that I sort of was on the board for, the Summer Street and the Mass Ave ones, are a lot better, I think, when they were approved than when they first came in the door.
Mhm.
Mhm.
You know, and I think that happened because of the fact that people did have to come here. They
Mhm.
weren't the buildings weren't that large, you know, but they were large enough to, or in the right location in one case, to trigger something. And I think they ended up better than they would have been, and better for the town than they would have been if they were able to build them as of right.
Mhm.
Could have just gone ahead and done them. Whether the process that got them there was the greatest process is a separate question, but
Mhm.
just I think the outcome was a better outcome.
I like that the hearing process is often more of a conversation about the project than a monolithic hearing. And that we have the flexibility to give them some feedback, have them come back, possibly multiple times as they refine the project. And I think that has led to better projects.
Mhm.
Okay. That's good. That's Andrew.
One of the things that
Public hearing process.
came out of one of those, I forget which one that Gene was mentioning, was they didn't have licensed architects. They had engineers and so forth. Somebody has to do it, so it's
Yeah.
not as if they didn't have that component. And then the question came up, I remember this discussion, well, did you consider hiring an architect? And they said, there's no way we would have the money to do that. Now, I don't know if that's really exactly true, because there's a lot of levels of architects,
Yeah.
big firms, medium, small firms, and I think maybe it's because I am an architect, but I was like, wait a minute, we're being saddled with quite a bit of design work that potentially could have been solved by having an architect.
And it was Andrew who ended up doing, which was great, but is that our role,
Well, could we have just said no instead of giving them suggestions for how to get to yes?
We-
I think that
we
goes
could
back
have-
to your
Could
point.
we
You
could
know,
have-
having a dialogue and.
Could we do
it's-
what-
But it
Yeah,
does generate
don't
more
think
work for us.
I don't think we can say no, just based on the design of a building, but
Can
that's why we have.
can we
that's
do
true.
what conservation commissions do, which is charge the applicant, so we can go hire an independent person to review their project?
For the scale of the projects, I don't know if that's necessarily the way to go. I think the other thing that we have been talking about is the design standards. And that is a process that would lend itself to basically having a subgroup of people, which could include architects, designers, design professionals, who can provide guidance and advice. And it might not necessarily be somebody on the board, but it could be also somebody on the board. In this case, it happens to be Andy, who's able to do that, which is great, and others
Yeah,
who
that's true.
have a design mind. But that's the idea behind the design guidance. Not necessarily to put it financially on them, and I don't know, I can't say.
When would that happen in the process? Should that happen in the process?
It would be before. It would be like a subcommittee that would
Before
review.
before the first hearing?
Probably, yeah, before the first hearing.
See, I think that's right. And see,
Yeah.
in a lot of these big city review, Boston, New York, they have, it's a consensus, it's not a consensus, you meet all the different stakeholders, whether it be the historical commission or the tree committee or whatever it is.
Hmm.
And then those people have put their input in. So now it comes to the ARB and we have now we have a little institutional knowledge about what people really think of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And also get ideas that we wouldn't even think of.
Right.
Like, don't kill this, 90-year-old tree.
Right.
So that is another thing that could be helpful
Mhm.
early on, is if there was that process. The problem with it is it's a scale thing.
Yeah,
They're gonna get back to someone saying, well, I'm just doing a store here, give me a break, I'm not gonna,
Mhm.
it fits in with the neighborhood, it's another store in the same line of other stores, so it's not warranting that kind of big review like you'd get for a 22 Mill Street or even the projects that we were talking about.
And I think we have to be conscious of, one of the master plan goals is to encourage development in Arlington. And if we add another step to the process, what's that going to do?
So maybe there's some trigger for size or scale that would bring in a
Right.
design review committee
Exactly.
to look at these things.
And
Whereas
that's
if it's just a
exactly what-
store or a storefront, we don't have to
Yeah.
worry about it.
right.
But if it's something on the scale of 887 Mass Ave, then it adds
Right.
one or two extra meetings,
Which
or,
is
or
exact-
not even
It
extra
might-
meetings.
That's
It might
exactly
still
what-
be the same number
Yeah,
of
that's
meetings.
what-
Could be the
it's
same
just
number, they
more
just-
meetings with the design review and less. with
That's
the
what they do
ARB.
in Boston.
Yeah,
other
I don't
places.
think it would change the timeline
Yeah.
significantly.
Could it be an option that that you can offer, like saying, help encourage developers, streamline their process, we offer a design review if you want. And then, if
I don't think it can be optional. I think it has to be based on some specific criteria that would require it for the buildings of a certain scope.
That's the term.
I would also be a little cautious. You probably have a lot more experience in Boston than I do, but my limited experience going before the BRA is that by the time it got to them, they were ready to rubber stamp, and they really didn't exercise any independent judgment at that point. And I think that's the potential downside of the process that we're talking about, which is once it goes through all these review things, people expect that it's going to be approved when it gets to the approving body. And that, I think, is the balance that's hard to maintain.
Usually you make it clear that it's advisory in nature, and they would be advisory to you, actually. So they'd be advising the board on what they found, what they recommend, what still has not been, revised in whatever plan or drawing. And so the decision-making still rests with you, regardless. I don't know.
I'm just cautioning that in the BRA, it sort of has devolved, I think, at least in my experience, that it was very much more staff driven on those decisions, and when it got to them, it was okay.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. It's something to be concerned about. So.
Well, when we've had very large projects, or very large for Arlington, there's usually a whole separate design process, which I think we were talking about at some previous meeting, where like Brigham, Sims, those had bigger design processes and much more like of a, internal development team almost reviewing the project before it came to the board. Mm-hmm. So I mean that's again, the scale and the context is kind of everything here.
And I'm gonna talk a little more about you saying making it mandatory. I think as someone who's a developer who wants to come in and develop something here, they're gonna want input and feedback. So I don't think you have to make it mandatory. They're gonna want that if you offer it. So I just think that if I'm a developer and I'm coming to town here and the town offers some design assistance on what we're looking for, I would take that in with all gusto I can, just because that's a good developer. Because it's all about timing and not having 2-3 meetings. If I can meet informally and get all the requests in, I would certainly do it. I would not say, oh no, I don't want to do that. I don't need to be bothered with that. I just and then if we find it comes here, we say, oh, did you take the design review? And we find it's really not really up to par, then we'll stick Andy on them.
See, I'm not thinking it's, I think a part of it is the process. So they come in knowing the process, and they say, okay, I've got a big enough project that you would be telling them, Jenny, the planning board, you need to do this, this, and this. You better see the historical commission first, because so you assist them in how to get through it quicker. Mm-hmm. I don't think that the design review is a separate thing. That may be
Can't promise the
appropriate at some point, but some people just want to know, how do I get through this quicker?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I never promise quicker, by the way. I help them get through it.
More expeditiously.
I mean that sort of, that's what I'm trying to say is there isn't really a hub, somebody who's coordinating all of the different boards, who's keeping track of things. That is part of the challenge. That brings us back to, it would be difficult for me to try to make anything quicker in the process. I can't even foresee that half the time, because other boards might want to have multiple meetings with the same applicant over different things, because it's whatever's in their jurisdiction. Like, for example, Downing Square is going to start talking with the Conservation Commission on Thursday night.
Yeah.
So, and that might take a number of meetings.
Right.
They came here for 3, they might go there for 5. I don't know. So we're a little past 8:15 actually. Do you want to keep talking about this, or do you want me to move on?
I think that the planning department should offer, and I think you do you officially offer a scoping advisory session pre-application?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah, we do that with any particularly the bigger applicants that have come along. They do come in, we do give them guidance. They usually sit with myself and 2 other staff. And or sometimes other staff that are not in the department, we talk with them about the process, about what's expected, about other things that they might need to do before they're ready to actually go to the board. Yeah.
I wonder if we could think about setting up some sort of subcommittee of the ARB to serve as a design review committee. It'd almost be, it would have to be a separate set of volunteers who had specific experience and maybe somebody, not to volunteer Andy for anything.
I like doing that stuff.
We have to eliminate a committee before we can have one.
You have to
It's
eliminate-
my place. But it wouldn't be it wouldn't be the kind of thing that would meet frequently
Right.
or ever unless it were necessary
Right.
for either whether we decided to do it on a volunteer basis or a
Mhm.
mandatory basis. They'd be appointed by us, they'd report to us,
Mhm.
they'd sit down with the developer at one of the points pre-hearing
Mhm.
to discuss things with the department and go through things only related to design
Mhm.
issues, going hand in hand with the design guidelines that we have in place.
And that could be architects, it could be landscape architects.
It could be landscape
lots of
architects,
other
somebody who doesn't
people in the
necessarily have the
design.
time or the willingness to sit on the board,
Yeah.
or could act as a bench for the
Mhm.
board in the future.
Yeah, planners. I mean,
Yeah.
we need, there have been various moments in time where we look at things from various angles, and to have that additional perspective might be useful.
Yeah, having someone who's not intimately involved in it on a daily basis, but lives here and has the same goals that I think the department and the board and selectmen and town manager have, that might be helpful. for
Would
the
that be
process.
useful? Would that be a helpful?
Yeah, very good
Step.
I
idea.
think it's, and then do you make the judgment, the planning department, whether this is appropriate or you
Mhm.
offer it somehow?
Mhm.
Because like I said, it's this tiny little project, or you're changing signage.
Yeah,
There's no point in giving advice about that, but if it's
right.
citing and things you want to include and
Mhm.
those big issues that affect how we will react to the thing, then
Mhm.
maybe
Yeah.
it is worth it.
Couldn't we do that? Couldn't they come to us before they file their application and say, I'd like to sit down with the board and have a discussion about design?
I've had if more than 2 of us meet on a subject like that.
No, I think,
It's a
Gene, are
public
you
hearing and
suggesting
all
we
that kind of
actually
stuff,
come
right?
to the meeting as an informational
It's
conversation?
like a pre-application meeting. Which again, for larger projects, the ARB has done something like that, but it seemed like we're differentiating between that and a number of, this would fall into a number of other types of projects.
Yeah.
I guess, do you want the board to have more of those types of that type of interface with different applicants? Or are we saying we need more expertise that we don't necessarily completely have here in this room to then help to advise and guide? Or both?
I think
Maybe
it's-
both,
I mean, I
either way.
feel like it may be both.
I think it might be both, but I think back to the 2 projects that are most fresh in our minds, Summer Street particularly. I think if we had had the opportunity to discuss things with both of those, we probably could have saved them one public hearing on the
Yeah.
end,
Yeah,
if we had looked at things in an informal manner.
Mhm.
And that may have taken the place of one of the meetings with your department alone. So it wouldn't necessarily have added to their soft costs and their
Mhm.
timeline.
Although it wasn't just design issues.
It wasn't just design issues, but then these are things that we could discuss. But then you start to skirt whether it's appropriate to do that or whether it should be a
Right.
formal public hearing
That's
and
what-
allow the public to comment.
Yeah.
I worry
Yeah,
about
those
that,
are
whether
issues.
this board cannot really, by the time we start doing that, we're actually ruling.
You're having
Yeah.
a meeting.
And
And
representing-
that's part of the reason I was thinking of doing it as a sub.
Yeah,
I
I think I worry
I
about
wouldn't
that.
even say a subcommittee, because once you get into formal committees, you have to comply with public meeting.
Design review
laws.
committee I would suggest and recommend it would be a formal committee, and we would post meeting note and agendas
Okay.
and things like that.
Yeah.
And that would be something that we would take care of administratively, just for the so
Yeah.
that people can see the process behind the
Yeah.
decision-making.
No, that makes sense.
And so you would be able to see it as well, because especially if you would be using that group, you'd want to know what they were, how they
Mhm.
came to their conclusions, I think. So. Would you like it if I spent time thinking about what that might look like and come back to the next meeting with some sort of
Yeah,
suggested way that we could do this?
I think I'd like that.
Then we could talk about it more.
Yeah.
I would, that may be a great idea. I just want to put out an alternative. I don't think we are prohibited by having somebody come in for a pre-application meeting. It's a public meeting. We can do it. If we know, or if the staff knows, it would be great to have, let's say, a landscape architect look at it. Maybe we could have a list of folks who
Mhm.
are willing to volunteer, and then we could say, hey, landscape architect, we're having a pre-app meeting, and it would be great to have a landscape architect there for part of the discussion.
And then it's open and we're all in the room, so
It's
we're
open,
hearing
we're
things
all
and
in the
seeing it as it
room.
happens.
Exactly, rather than sort of this, sort of one
Yeah.
removed and then it comes to
Yeah,
us.
I agree with that,
How
because
that works.
ultimately, I think we may have changes at the end anyway, so.
Would you have public hearing there too?
Well, it's.
No, you don't have to, I don't think you have to advertise it as a public hearing, you just advertise it as an agenda item.
Right.
But would neighbors come and then also want to participate, or?
Probably.
And would that be allowed or not allowed? Because that's just bringing,
Up to the chair.
okay.
I would agree. I agree with what you guys said.
Yeah.
I think it'll keep it simpler, actually. And if we can do it as a part of an agenda of a meeting,
Yeah.
it's an information session, however you want to treat it.
Yeah, I think if I'm, or my successor.
No, there will be no success.
Yeah, as long as it's made clear to anyone in attendance that it's an informational session and not a public hearing,
They haven't filed their application.
Yeah.
that nothing's been filed.
They're here to ask questions and
Yeah.
whatever insights we can get.
Take the temperature of the board and the
Yeah.
town, and I think that's
I
fair.
think- I agree with you.
And
Yeah,
then
I
if
think
we
that may
can
be the
get
way to-
some experts to help us. that would
Because
be-
once you put it in another committee, like you said, it just gets too confusing.
It gets confusing.
And somebody
it's-
has to be there.
Someone has to be there, someone has to report back accurately.
Right, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Jenny, do you know, what do the neighboring communities do? Do any of them have a process like that works well? Or even not neighboring, like any analogous communities?
Many have design review committees of their planning board
And they
and
work
use
well?
them in the way that we were just talking about previously.
Okay.
They may also have a pre-application process, but
Yeah. You know, the more-
they use a design review committee to, to help move a proposal along that meets, that's been reviewed, but is not in a process where it's gone to the board yet,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and it's a pretty typical process.
I think the more we
Cambridge
talk
does
about it,
that.
I like Gene's approach. And some of that is selfish. I don't really want to give up the right to sit and opine on whatever is out there.
No, I agree completely. It should be the board, not secondary.
Yeah.
The other thing, we can do in that kind of a meeting is say, well, you really gotta go talk to TAC, for instance,
Mhm.
the traffic. We can help them.
Mhm.
Right.
This is gonna be a huge trigger.
Well,
for
that's
you
true.
guys.
There have
Yeah.
been a couple things where we've had sat down at the public hearing, and all of a sudden we've decided that they need a traffic analysis. That adds a month to their process.
Right, now they're gonna wait for them. So,
So if the board wants to do more of the pre-application sort of process, then I still think that we need to come back. We're now kind of off of environmental design review quite a bit. But I think you still need to go back to design review sort of criteria and get into more of that conversation, which was sort of a separate item in our goals to talk about the design standards that you created in 2015 was just limited to commercial and industrial, but to also include residential. Because that gets to what guidance you're providing to applicants, which I think is still an area where there seems to be a little bit of uncertainty.
How much residential stuff do we review?
Mixed use. which is
Okay, I
residential.
mean, commercial, okay,
Yeah.
all right,
Yeah,
sorry. I
like
meant-
it is literally like commercial.
Okay, I thought you meant houses,
Yeah.
like.
That's
Yeah.
probably a well.
But we have
mixed use,
reviewed
that's
quite a bit
something
of
else.
residential. I mean, in terms of units over the last year.
Okay, I just view it a little differently when I see mixed
Yeah.
use, I see that commercial.
You
I
see
don't-
the commercial side to it.
No, I
right?
see that's commercial, period.
Right.
Yeah.
And
But Downing Square
Downing
and
Square was not commercial.
Westminster were both fully residential.
And there was a 3-story building on Mass Ave.
Yeah, Capitol,
There have
Capitol
been
Square.
a number of other ones.
I still call those commercial. Anything above three
Yeah.
family is commercial.
Yeah,
Right.
no, they're all out there, but then we'd probably have to work with the ZBA to some extent on residential design, and then residential study group.
Oh, the residential study group, yeah, that is what they are talking about
That's what
doing
they
as
want.
well.
So, it's a conversation that is coming for sure.
So right now, we receive applications, they submit a proposal as it is. Pre-application, you're talking about before they even officially submit anything. Is that what you're talking about? I just wanna be clear about what you mean with pre-application, because now we're changing actually a process, which is, I think, also a little bit of a change to the bylaw,
Well,
which
do-
I'd wanna
do
be
they
careful
do
about.
they file and do they submit anything to you before the whole submittal packet that's in the application
It
materials?
depends. Sometimes they just have like one design idea. Sometimes they just come in to talk about a parcel.
Yeah.
Sometimes
I mean, that's
they
almost
fill it
something
out.
like someone could file like a project initiation form or something like that,
Mhm.
just to start the process, and then
Yeah.
could have a discussion before they submit anything else.
That's where I'd like to head.
If we add a form, I think
with
we
the
have to amend the
administrative
bylaw.
procedures, but we need to amend the whole bylaw first. So that's where I'm wondering where this part fits in, because it feels like an administrative amendment that is in the zoning bylaw.
Well, I thought most people who have a project, once they realize it's gonna be a special permit,
Mhm.
I would assume they would come in and talk to you and say, "Hey, Jenny, I have a project,"
Those two.
and say, and we believe it's a special
Or-
permit.
Yeah,
What are some of the requirements? Can you help us out and this stuff here? And then
right.
that could be the trigger, saying, well, you can also, present some ideas to the board to see what their thoughts are.
Mhm.
Before you do the full blown engineering and all the other stuff, and just get some more guidance that way. That could be a good offer right there.
Mhm.
Is where the trigger point is.
Mhm.
And then also, some people might come in with say, here's my application, here's my drawings, here's my money. And you could say, well, do you want to have a formal hearing, or do you want, just get a few minutes of the board's time to see what this is, and then make any changes that may happen.
Mhm.
So they still have opportunity to make changes. It could happen, I think it's solely up to your discretion
Yeah,
and how it happens.
okay.
You know.
Because then, once I have it, I actually post it as a public hearing. And it becomes a public hearing process.
Yep.
So it's not
Mhm.
really a pre-application at that point, just to be clear. You'd
Well,
be
if they
having a
if
public
they decide
hearing.
not to hand it in at that point, you don't have to.
Almost everybody, once they're ready to hand something in,
Mhm.
it's at the point where it needs to have a public hearing. And that is the next phase of the process, the next step in the
Okay.
process. The first steps in the process are generally talking to myself and staff, and then talking with inspectional services.
Mhm.
Those are basically the two hits that almost always happen, either simultaneously or in some other order.
It seems to me that if people haven't yet filed their application, they can be given the choice, do you want to file an application? And you can advise them a little bit on the pros and cons. Or would you prefer to sit down with the ARB before you file the application and get their input? And they can either say,
And it becomes a less formal
Right,
process.
and
it's a
It doesn't
less
require
formal
the
process.
That's what I would
advertising.
go.
Yeah.
Require
and so that gives them the opportunity to decide, do they want to sit down with us and maybe some experts we might have available before they file the application, or they want to file the application and enroll that way.
Mhm.
Possible.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
Okay.
We'll test it. I'm gonna sit down.
You didn't finish on those pages right there.
I did not,
That's all right.
no.
We can,
Are we
we can,
done with this?
Sometimes we don't finish, and that's
Are we
okay.
done with this?
we can move on.
We will finish those pages at some point.
I mean, so moving on,
Yeah,
it's,
this would
it's,
go on for a long time.
it's
We
still
made our-
Jenny's show with the zoning
Oh, boy.
recodification update and our public hearing on Wednesday night.
David can partake in this as well,
But now we're at
right?
8:35.
Sure.
I mean, you have all the documents in front of you.
Do you want us
These
to
are
go
all
to
the-
that meeting?
Yes, yeah, everyone
This-
should be at that meeting.
This Wednesday night.
Mhm.
At 7 o'clock,
7 o'clock.
next door.
Town
the
hall.
senior center.
Town hall.
Oh, it's
Town
that's
hall.
right, it's here now.
It's
Town hall
here.
auditorium.
Yeah, it's in the auditorium now. I forgot about that.
So, pretty much what's in your packet are all the, with the exception of the second reading draft, which you've seen, nothing has changed with that. But all the other documents are the new documents that we posted last Wednesday, which help the general public to understand what has changed, where it's moved to, and why it's changed as part of the recodification process. The documents, all of them were, except for the timeline, although we updated the timeline, have been basically created by staff and in my office and zoning recodification working group members. It was quite an effort. Really impressed and thankful for the work. Very careful work. And so what you have basically I'll tell you the different documents. The one document is a memo that you probably saw from RKG back in February. What we did was we took this zoning assessment and we said, what's the update? What happened either as part of recodification or not? What's incomplete and why? So we went through line by line, and you see in red sort of the answers to those comments. That's one document. The other document is an updated timeline. As you know, when we did this timeline back in July, we had anticipated a fall special town meeting. I still think fall runs through December, but we're definitely not going to make it to a fall special town meeting. So we've moved that to sometime in the winter. Special town meeting still has yet to be called. When it is called, then we'll work backwards from there. But it allows you to see the updated timeline where the next forum is, the various open houses that we've been holding.
So it's this year.
2018 is special town meeting, probably in late January.
Oh, okay. When I read that, I thought it was like winter of next year. But sorry. Okay, it's this winter.
This winter.
Next
Yeah.
year.
Which
Okay.
is next year.
Which is
Which is
All right. Never mind. It's my own.
January. It's not that far off.
I just took
It's
it the other
one more
way. I'm
season
like,
away.
wow, it's another. Okay.
all right, there's that document. And then there's two more documents because one document was simply not enough for you. So we have I believe this may in fact be a novel outlining
The definition.
all of the, the definitions document is quite long, but there are two documents. One is, they're both called Guide to Arlington Zoning Bylaw Recodification. One is just basically a guide to everything, section by section, and with, basically it's meant to be read by row. And the rows are each section. The columns indicate the existing zoning bylaw section, the existing title, the proposed section, the proposed title, if there is one, and there's no changed titles, the amendment summary, and the amendment purpose. And then the second document is a completely separate one just for the definitions, because there's so many definitions in the zoning bylaw and many recommended amendments to those definitions to bring them mostly into the modern era. So that is, those are all the documents. They were posted last week. I received one comment from a citizen in the zoning recodification email,
Positive?
and it was very positive.
Cool.
They were so happy that we posted the information, and they had very minor suggested edits, and other individuals who are looking forward to coming to the forum. I have not received any other feedback so far. So the feedback is meant to happen at the forum on Wednesday night.
Are we
But
gonna hit every single line?
no, what, the design of the forum is basically going to be me introducing the process, where we're at, where, the timeline, where we're going, and to walk through the documents, but then give people time on their own to review the documents. And I think that this gives people who have not necessarily been able to review everything word for word, be able to sit there by themselves to review things, and then ask people if they have questions. So it'll be very much, the majority of the forum will be people asking questions. And the people answering the questions will include members of the Zoning Recodification Working Group and RKG. And I will be facilitating primarily, and Laura will be scribing. And so that's pretty much the forum on the night.
I think these are really good documents to have created. They must have taken a lot of time to get there, but I think it's going to be well worth it that you did it.
Thank you.
That's my sort of take on it.
Mm-hmm. Second, the format here is really nice. It makes it easy
Good.
to understand, just simple. And at the last meeting, I think you answered a lot of people's requests of where it's going, where it's from,
Mm-hmm.
why it's changing. I think this is good.
Good. Thanks.
Yeah. All right.
I
Anything
think
else on that?
the only thing I will say is, now that people have this, some people may want some time with it after the meeting on Wednesday to give you comments on the second reading draft.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, we are proposing to have comments come to us through November 10th, I think is the deadline. And so we'll also let that be known at the meeting.
yeah.
The proposed date of your public hearing for the actual hearing draft is December 11th, which is not a regular meeting date,
December 11th.
December 11th. And so your regular meeting dates that month are whatever
You'll be here?
December 4th and 18th.
You'll be here though, right?
It'll be here,
Okay.
yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah. That's it.
All right.
Zoning recodification.
Great. All right. Approval of meeting minutes from August 7th, 2017 and September 11th, 2017.
These are back to you because you asked, I think because one of them, something we amended from last time, that was on August 7th.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so that's the amended version.
Okay.
And you wanted to see the amended version before you approved it.
That was your amendment, right, Gene?
Yes.
Yep, my changes in there. So.
Okay.
I move to accept both of the minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Correspondence, Jenny, do you want to talk to us about?
I'm not going to be here on December 11th.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's okay.
About this notice that we received.
Everybody else, are you gonna be here on December 11th? So quickly?
I
Because we need 4, at least.
Yeah.
I had
looks like
scheduled something knowing we were meeting the week before and week afterward.
Everybody else okay on December 11th?
Mhm.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
It's okay.
That's right.
Okay, so Leela Shepherd is the new environmental planner / conservation agent in the department.
Sorry, did we approve both?
Oh, did you?
We did.
We only did
Yeah,
one,
did
right?
both,
unanimously.
Yeah, we did both.
Did both?
My motion was both.
His
Oh.
motion was both.
Okay.
I'm gonna beat this agenda. Yeah.
We got 20 minutes left. All right, so Leela attended a training about Chapter 91. Some of you might already be familiar with Chapter 91. Who's familiar with Chapter 91? How about that? All right. Yeah. All right, so Chapter 91 has a statement in it about planning boards.
I didn't know that part of it.
We're a planning board. So, what this means is there is, on occasion, there's development that happens around Spy Pond, which would trigger Chapter 91 review. And there's a possibility that this board would have some role in reviewing that proposal moving forward. This is a relatively new law, by the way.
Do you think it's only Spy Pond? I couldn't figure out if it's any
Leela
like
and I
thing
looked at
along
it.
Alewife Brook or Mystic Lake.
We're still actually determining it, but they
Uh-huh.
actually have a list on the state website, and that's what we could find so far. So she's actually confirming a couple of other things, was hoping to have that information to us for the meeting tonight, so I can clarify further, but I think this is more of a heads up at this moment in time, that this will be something forthcoming. And I'll work with Leela on what the process would look like.
So the reason that Chapter 91 is on my radar is apparently some communities are using it to improve bicyclist and pedestrian access, because the first condition is allow public access along the shore, over, under, around structure, and apparently there's some good projects going on hanging off of that to improve non-motorized access.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some opportunities.
Except Chapter 91 around Great Ponds does not provide for public access around the pond. That's why I was wondering about Alewife Brook.
Interesting.
Or Mystic Lake. Because it's not, this Chapter 91 depends on the water body. So I'm not, at least my recollection is that it wouldn't allow somebody who wants to put a dock, it wouldn't require somebody who wants to put a dock in on Spy Pond to provide public access if the public access isn't there.
Right.
But the Boys and Girls Club would have to
Yes.
fall under that jurisdiction. They would have to apply public access to the bicycle and everything else if they want to put a dock in.
Because
It's a public building, right? It's public access there already. If they want to put a dock in to Spy Pond, then this would apply.
I don't know if it'll apply to
No?
the Boys and Girls Club.
I know it doesn't apply to like one of those single-family houses that abuts it. Yes, I agree with you. But I thought it would apply.
If it's, I mean, part of Chapter 91 has to do with public tidelands. If it's public tidelands, then clearly there's a need for public access. But these are, that's why I asked about Alewife Brook and Mystic. But Spy Pond is not, I don't believe it's public tidelands. I believe it's captured because it's a great pond. And the rules for public access to great ponds, I believe, is not the same as it is for filled tidelands. Just put that out there as, I think, some distinctions that if it ever comes to us, we'll have to know or figure it out.
You get a lawyer on board and figure it out, huh?
Oh, I was going to say, Nathaniel Stevens is definitely on top of this. He's the chair of the Concom and an attorney. They're talking about it at their meeting on Thursday night, but I'm wondering if you had the time and you were interested in talking with myself and Leela, perhaps about this process, it would be very helpful. Like
Maybe
how this
if we could
could
get
work.
Nathaniel into the
And Nathaniel,
conversation
sure.
also. Because I read the stuff and I went and read the regulations on which
Okay.
it's based. And I mean, it says for some things, if we do nothing, DEP will approve it.
Mm-hmm.
There's one part where if we do nothing, it doesn't quite say what they're supposed to do,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was really interesting. But it didn't seem to give us any criteria in which to make a decision. It gives, I mean, the Conservation Commission has to follow all its wetland stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but it didn't seem to give us any different criteria than we might otherwise have to make a decision about it. I thought it was like just DEP trying not to do its job and pushing it on the towns.
That's good. That's an observation for sure. Well, is it okay if I
Yeah.
follow up with you?
Yeah.
I don't have anything for this. Is more of an update to you, FYI. I don't have. There will be a process, but how it interfaces with the ARB is to be determined. It's not on time.
All right. Is there any other business we haven't discussed? Or should discuss?
I'll just give a really brief report on the Community Preservation Act Committee. We started meeting. We got in, I don't remember the exact number, quite a number of preliminary applications for the year. And the final applications are due, I think, at the end of this year. And there's some interesting ones. There are two preliminary ones that I think shouldn't qualify under CPA. I'm not sure every member of the committee agrees with me on that, so we'll
Be a rebel.
so we'll see what happens with those. But most of the projects look interesting and they look consistent with the master plan and with the open space and recreation plan and housing development plan. So most of them I think look good.
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 All right. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned.